Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an absolute honour and privilege. I would like you to please make welcome the President of Conversations at the Crossroads, a man whose legacy goes far beyond, who I've just been told has taught over 40,000 students here, especially in Victoria. Please put your hands together for Joe Camilleri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamel. Today we are reclaiming democracy together. On this auspicious occasion, when we gather to consider the future of democracy in Australia and across the Western world, Conversation at the Crossroads is deeply honoured to have with us Uncle Colin Hunter Jr., a proud generational Wurundjeri man connected to the lands on which we are gathered here today. Uncle Colin Uncle Colin worked in cultural heritage for 10 years before beginning his work in local government. He's a member of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation Board of Directors and co-chair at Southeastern Department of Health and Human Services Aboriginal Working Group. He brings deep cultural knowledge, community connection, and care for country. Over to you, Uncle Colin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome. It is my honour and privilege to be here today. My name is Colin Hunter IV. I would like to start off by acknowledging that this afternoon we are on Wurundjeri country, home of my ancestors, and also home to everybody here today. I wish to pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging, elders from all nations, especially all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members joining us here today. Wurundjeri is a part of the Kulin Nation and of the Wurrung language group. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne across to the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek, and east to Mount Baw. A big thank you to everybody who has helped make this event possible this afternoon. Wominjeka, welcome, and I hope everybody has a fantastic evening ahead. Thank you very much for your time today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Uncle Colin, for joining us to welcome the people here in the Town Hall and online to join what we hope will be an historic event at the Melbourne Town Hall. I should introduce a parenthesis. We had some technical issues and the people joining us online, and we welcome you, of course, as together with everyone here present at the Town Hall. You probably have now received 2 links. The second link was sent as a way of dealing with the technical issue. It could be Zoom first, Zoom link, and then YouTube. We suggest you can join on either, but for quality of participation, we recommend you go for the Zoom link, the initial link that you received. In listening to the generous welcome to country, need I hardly say that we welcome the day when long overdue justice will be done to the First Nations of this land. So We may well ask, how is it that Conversation at the Crossroads has initiated this project, Reclaiming Democracy Together? Why are we here today? It is, of course, a day that is being officially celebrated in different parts of the world. It is Europe Day today, and official European Union pronouncements speak of a stronger, more inclusive, more democratic, and more culturally aware European community with a shared commitment to the future of generations to come. Well, wonderful sentiments, except that the reality is a darker one. Democracy across an increasingly bureaucratized European Union has been fast receding for some time now. With the hard right topping the polls in the UK, France, and Germany, most recently in the local council elections a day or so ago in the UK. And today, Russia is celebrating Victory Day. But one wonders whether there is a great deal to celebrate at this time, both in terms of developments within and, of course, the war in Ukraine. And in Australia, we're marking the 125th anniversary of the official opening of the Australian Parliament, an event widely considered at the time as a very significant step towards a confident, peaceful, democratic Australia. Lots of questions being raised by that expectation, and it does pose the question, where are we now? Not just in Australia, but internationally, and particularly in the Western world, which projects itself as the paragon of democracy. We live in the midst of a deep malaise, fed by disempowerment, growing mistrust of politicians, political parties, and even parliaments, disengagement from civic life, fake news, bigotry, the rise of the far right, with extremist and racist narratives becoming louder by the day. We very much hope that it will be possible to reverse this decline. Our aim through this project, and in concert with many others, is to create innovative spaces, large and small, online and in person, structured and informal, within and across national borders, where people of different cultural backgrounds, not least the First Nations of this land, can participate, deliberate, and collectively reimagine and shape the future of this land and its place in the world. But let's not get too carried away. Let's pause for a moment. Is the democratic dream not sheer delusion? An ill-thought-out urge to swim against the tide? Do we really understand what makes our current world tick? Well, that is why we've assembled an eminent group of thinkers, advocates, educators, practitioners, to help us think through where we've come from, where we're at now, and where we might be heading. But of course, everyone here can and should also have their say. So if you have not already done so, please tell us how you see the current state of democracy and what, if anything, should be done to make it better. Please fill in the survey using the QR code that was shown earlier. And the results will make for interesting reading when they are shown on the big screen in just a little while. So, let me now call on John Keane, Professor of Politics at the University of Sydney. A few years, many years ago, he held a postdoctoral fellowship at Cambridge, where he worked closely with Anthony Giddens, Quentin Skinner, and scholars of many kinds. He arranged and edited Václav Havel's first book in English, The Power of the Powerless, in 1985. In 1989, he founded the world's first democracy research institute, the London-based Centre for the Study of Democracy. He later directed the Sydney Democracy Network, a network of researchers, activists, and policymakers concerned with the future of democracy. For over 2 decades, he was Distinguished Research Professor at the Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin, one of Europe's largest and most respected social science research institutions. And since so many published works dealing with different pieces of the democratic puzzle translated into some 30 languages, John Keane.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Sisters and brothers, citizenesses, as you were called in the 18th century, and citizens. I want to say that I'm really delighted, a bit terrified, and truly honored to be with you to contribute to this afternoon's gathering to commemorate the official opening of our federal parliament on this day 125 years ago. And to share with you 2 troublemaking, maybe outrageous thoughts about the matter of democracy, empire, and decolonization. First, as you probably know, the opening of Parliament was a strangely surreal imperial event. It was overseen by the son of King Edward VII, the Duke of Cornwall and York, who that morning of May the 9th had driven through Melbourne streets lined with cheering crowds. The crowd of 15,000 people were mostly comprised of well-heeled gentlemen, perfumed and behatted ladies. In the presence of the dreaded usher of the black rod, all of them were white. There were senators and a House of Representatives elect bowing and bearing their "So God help me" oaths of allegiance to the recently appointed loyal Governor-General, the Scots-born aristocrat Lord Hopetoun. You could say that Lord Hopetoun's name was unfortunate because it turned out that this Governor-General was hopeless, a loser dogged by big spending habits, political blunders to do with the appointment of the first Prime Minister at Barton, which soon forced him to return to Blighty. And there was the highlight of this event, the formal address by the Duke, a royal known for his love of stamp collecting, animal hunting, and ruling his 6 children with a rod of iron. The Duke bigged up to the audience the local support for the Boer War, in which, as you may know, 1,000 Australian colonial troops surrendered their lives. He expressed the King's thankfulness, I'm quoting, and heartfelt satisfaction at the completion of that political union of which this Parliament is the embodiment. Trumpets sounded, a cabled message from the King was read out. The newly elected politicians then swore their allegiance to the empire. Our event is a good deal more tawdry and tattered, I would say. So, the launch of Parliament that we're commemorating was very much a colonial affair. But it had, I believe, a Jekyll and Hyde quality. It was equally an act of mental and institutional decolonization. It was the refusal, as Tsitsi Dangaremba, the Zimbabwean woman writer, puts it, is a characteristic of all empires and all colonial subjugation. It was a refusal of masochistic wallowing, The opening of Parliament, we could say, was only possible because of a long string of prior struggles for a straight-spined dignity. For instance, the formation of larrikin trade unions, the Eureka Uprising, the overthrow of what Daniel Dennehy, an Irish lawyer, called the local bunyip aristocracy. The grand opening was the culmination of a string of firsts in the history of democracy. Breakthroughs that included, for instance, the use of proportional representation for the first time in the world in Adelaide's 1804 local government elections. The early adoption of the adult male suffrage, 1856. The secret ballot, which is still known in various parts of the world as the Australian ballot. Support de facto for Indigenous voting. Referendums which endorsed a commonwealth, a common weal, a res publica with power over old age pensions and interstate industrial disputes. It was a new federation for the common good based on the universal franchise that resulted in 1904, as you may know, in the election of the first national Labour government in the world, led by Chilean-born John Christian Watson. By global standards, the spirit of these world-first innovations was emphatically democratic in my view. Yes, these world's first came stained with the blood and suffering of a near genocide of our indigenous peoples. It was tainted by the forced exclusion of Asian, African, and Pacific Islander residents who were explicitly barred from voting, for instance, in Queensland and Western Australia. But the grand opening was undoubtedly infused with democratic sentiments that had been brewing for decades. It was not just a business deal among bickering, racist colonial entrepreneurs who wanted a new free market customs union. The Commonwealth was thought to have the backing of God. It was typically a Protestant God. Some said it had destiny on its side. Inside the British Empire, its 3.5 million loyal white daughters and sons would become the equals of their white masters. The downtrodden, drovers' wives, bushmen, diggers alike would throw off their chains. Henry Parkes, the New South Wales Premier who opened the campaign for federation, you may know, summarised the spirit in a rhyming poem. God girdled our majestic isle with seas far-reaching east and west, that man might live beneath this smile in peace and freedom ever blessed. Yes, the champions of the new federal government were in two minds. They were possibly bipolar. Although they encouraged children of their country to wave the Union Jack in schools for the first time during this period, they thought of federation as an act of decolonisation. John Downer, a delegate from South Australia, said it like this: "Although I am an Australian, at heart I'm an Englishman." Samuel Griffith, the son of a Congregational minister, former Premier and Chief Justice of Queensland and Chief Draftsman of the Constitution, put things more bluntly. He said, "I am tired of being treated as a colonial." Second, sisters and brothers, a second thought. I'd like to turn in conclusion to our times to offer a less obvious and more outrageous thought. I think we're living through turbulent times in which our democracy's dependence upon a crumbling American empire requires us once again to do a second decolonization of the spirit and substance of our democracy. I had expected booing. The American empire once played the role in my lifetime in building and securing the complex of global rules-based Bretton Woods institutions. Think of the Marshall Plan, in which some, mostly rich, white and privileged, so-named liberal democracies flourished. But I think Mark Carney is right. The writing is on the American wall. That era is over. Contrary to the saber-rattling bravado and bullshit of the Trump administration and its followers, The global grip of their empire is weakening. The United States loses every war, including this one on Iran. On virtually every measure, China is overtaking the United States. And as we see, when empires reach their endgame, it's a strong historical pattern. They're always paranoid, lawless, nasty, and bellicose. That's why outlier democracies such as Germany, France, Italy, Canada, Spain, Greece, Chile, Australia, and New Zealand are nowadays struggling to make sense of the decline of the American empire and the global rules it once enforced. They're being pushed this way and that by what's called the Kissinger rule. To be the enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be its friend is fatal. So my thought is that outlier democracies like Australia are being forced to adjust to a new reality of turbulence and confusion. They find themselves confronted by new questions about how, in self-defense, they can decolonize themselves, how they can lift their heads, straighten their spines to protect and nurture their own democratic institutions and ways of life against the shocks and confusion now gnawing away at their coherence, their morale, their stability, and future resilience. Sisters and brothers, to call for a decolonization of our government and our way of life has, I think, rich democratic implications. I have a long list of much-needed reforms which runs something like this. The rebuilding of a countrywide effective body for representing and defending the voices and interests of our Indigenous peoples. That we do not have such a body should be seen as scandalous. Breathing new life on my list is breathing new life into the old known Australasia. It still exists on some buildings to register the presence and the rights of millions of people whose multicultural roots and ways of living are shared with our wider region. Media reforms, breaking the grip of the Murdoch empire and its servile journalism. Strengthening the spirit and substance of public service media, new laws for the protection of public speech against injustice. On my list are bold legislative reforms, such as the regulation of lobbyists. I think there ought certainly to be a royal commission into the strangling effects of the Zionist lobby. Canadian-style new laws against the use of revolving doors by Scotty from marketing-type ex-politicians. And even the abolition of the power of the Governor-General, you may not know of it, to prorogue parliaments. Advancing new socially useful public investment strategies funded by taxes on the rich and redistributive policies which put a stop to the growing social inequality in a very wealthy country in which the struggling bottom 20% of our population owns just 1% of national wealth. And in foreign policy terms, standing up to our American masters, admitting that we were wrong about Gaza, wrong about AUKUS, straightening our spines, not through fantasies of go-it-alone nationalism, Australia for Australians, but by taking the advantage of the breakdown of the American empire by renewing our commitments to the global rule of law, by nurturing a multiplex of new cross-border connections among cities, universities, small businesses, professional groups, governments, and NGOs like Amnesty and Médecins Sans Frontières. Citizens and citizenesses, if my list is too short or not to your taste, let's talk more. But in the spirit of reclaiming democracy, an ideal recall, which is much more than periodic elections and gathering in public assemblies. These examples underpin my hope is that we will say again and again, uncontrolled power is dangerous. America on the skids is trying to sow division and disunity to its advantage. Contrary to Mr. Mars, they can no longer politically be fully trusted or relied upon. That's why democracy, once again, for very different reasons than my grandparents supposed, is an indispensable global virtue, a non-negotiable basic requirement everywhere of a decent and dignified life for creatures large and small on an endangered planet we call home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. John did warn me that he would have a few strong words to say about a particular subject. Thank you so much. And may I draw your attention, John has very recently had a new book published, 1st of May, I believe, Democrats and Despots, and you will see it on the screen. There are flyers on the literature tables, so you might be interested in purchasing a copy in the near future. I'm sure it'll be of great interest. And now to another important contributor to this event today. An established scholar, advocate, and practitioner, Gillian Triggs. She's been United Nations Assistant High Commissioner for Refugees, President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Dean of the Sydney Law School. Her 5-year tenure as President of the Human Rights Commission was, to put it mildly, difficult at times, as the Abbott and Turnbull governments sought to scale back the size of the Commission. Following this experience, she took up the position of Assistant Secretary General of the UN and Assistant High Commissioner for Protection of the United Nations, High Commission for Refugees. During her appointment, she traveled to a great many countries and learned a great deal about the position of people displaced internally and externally. Today, it's our privilege to have Gillian Triggs share her insights with us.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you all for being here today. I cannot believe we have so many people willing to come and talk about these very important issues. And indeed, of course, we're here to commemorate the 125th anniversary, really, of Australia's gathered at the exhibition buildings up the road for the opening of the first Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia under the Federal Constitution. And I'm reminded of that remarkable Tom Roberts painting, The Big Picture, which, as John has already said, represented a totally different world. I wish we had a formal painter, but presumably we can get a photograph of how different you are from what it was like 125 years ago. So well done, thanks for being here. There are no more imperial feathers, and no more ceremonial swords, almost all men. How wonderful to see such a diverse audience, and many more women. Well, we are here primarily to continue the conversation which has started, to refresh, renew, and reform our understanding of democracy, and to meet the contemporary challenges of globalization, especially the rise in civil and international conflict, climate change, the millions of people seeking international protection across boundaries, threats to free international trade, pandemics, and growing inequality and injustice. For in the 21st century, we've seen a decline in respect for the vital elements of democracy, but especially a decline in respect for the rule of law. But of course, this has never been perfect. I strongly support the efforts today to revive our commitment as Australians to the democratic ideal with civic education, understanding the principles of executive government, of parliament, and an independent judiciary, and the principles of the separation of power through an increased local community participation in decision-making and international engagement. While the challenges to democracy in Australia are real, and I know other speakers will focus on these, but my focus is on the international rule of law as being of critical importance. For the health of our democracy in Australia cannot be understood only by reference to Australian issues. In our interconnected world, we must consider how the rule of law internationally can be strengthened to respond to global challenges. Indeed, it's no wonder at all that the decline in respect for the principles of democracy in national laws is reflected in international behaviour. But I'd like to go back for a few minutes, and some of you here will remember the foundations of that international rules-based order with the UN Charter, agreed in 1945 at the end of the Second World War by 51 countries, establishing, as it was necessary for the purposes of agreement, permanent representatives with a veto vote: China, Russia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and France. But Australia, as a founding member, to the beggar thy neighbour policies of the 30s, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. The development of the UN agencies, the World Food Programme, the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, the protection of property rights, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the treaties on genocide, on migrant workers, on women and aged people, the international covenants on civil and political, economic and social rights, and then the more ordinary day-to-day rules relating to the law of the sea and access to resources. But despite this optimistic and confident development of law in the 20th century, in the 21st, we've seen a significant weakening of the rule of law in our relations internationally, and they have declined. Today, there's a weakened respect for multilateralism, a retreat from those international obligations, very notably by the nations that negotiated, promoted, and benefited from that global rules-based order. And there are many, many examples. But one that I think is most perhaps disturbing to me as a young law student here at the University of Melbourne and learning about the Charter has been that the optimism and vision of the UN Charter has crumbled as the Security Council has not been able to meet its primary objective of peace. It's been sidelined by ad hoc coalitions predominantly run by the United States and a reckless use of force by powerful states. We've seen the cynical and opportunistic use of the veto by the 5 permanent members that's brought the Security Council to its knees, largely sidelined from the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, blocking the UN Charter principles for peace. We've seen a deliberate undermining of the United Nations and its agencies through drastically reduced budgets. We've seen chaos in relation to the WTO trade rules. We've seen a rise in civil conflicts particularly in the Sudan, in parts of Africa, to the point that Pope Francis has observed that we're already in a third world war, albeit a fractured one. National security and self-defense are invoked selectively to justify egregious breaches of territorial sovereignty, and we see this in Lebanon, in Iran, Iraq, and Ukraine. In fact, I remember the last time I was in this hall was where we were debating the coalition of the willing, the invasion of Iraq, without Security Council authorization and without democratic discussion or approval, all done without the consideration of the Australian public. Contrary to the Geneva Conventions also, citizens are the target of aggression in most civil conflicts and international conflicts these days. They are more than mere collateral damage. And we also see the consequences of climate change. We see China challenging the law of the sea. We see humanitarian crises with 130 million people under the United Nations Refugee Agency mandate. And we see rising movements of people forcibly displaced, compounding the populist nationalism, promoting the denial of refugee protection, rising anti-migration demands, now leading international political issue for countries, including for Australia. Well, in trying to understand what appears to be the failure of international law and democracy and its institutions to reduce conflict and promote peace, we need to recognize that the world is a very different place today than it was when these grand ideas were first agreed by the international community. From the original 51 founding nations in 1945, there are now 193 sovereign members of the UN, many, as John's pointed out, achieving independence from colonial powers. The Democracy Index, compiled by the economist groups, estimates that there are only 26 of those 193 nations that are full working democracy, Australia being one of them. The remaining 167 members of the international community are listed as flawed democracies, including the United States, or they are hybrid or out-and-out authoritarian. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has said that the UN today is at imminent risk of financial collapse, with its agencies mortally wounded with underfunding. And Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, in his Davos speech, went further, declaring the end of the rules-based international order. Quoting Thucydides, "The strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must," the very antithesis of democracy and everything that you're here to support. I do, however, believe that the Prime Minister Carney has gone too far. We should not be blinded by the illegal acts of rogue or maverick states, albeit immensely powerful ones. This is because it remains true today that the international rule of law is generally respected and has been over the last 80 years, mainly because it's in our mutual interest to do so. Most sovereign nations continue to see the mutual benefits of the rule of law and are finding workarounds, as you'll be aware, to ensure that these rules continue to apply. But international law fails spectacularly in restraining nations from aggression, where their perceived national interests are overwhelming. That's typically when we're dealing with territory, with borders, and with rich natural resources. And a notable example where I spent a certain amount of my time with the UN was the conflict in eastern DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, in North Kivu province, a conflict between that country and Rwanda. It's led to the displacement of 8.1 million people, essentially over the control of gold mines and lithium deposits, much of which finds its way to China. Well, all of that's perhaps rather abstract, and I'm an international lawyer, I love to talk about international law. But a practical example of the decline in adherence to international rules arises in response to the mass movement of peoples. UNHCR estimates that at the end of June last year, about 120 million people have been forced to flee their homes globally due to persecution, conflict, violence, egregious human rights violations, and in some cases, events disturbing public order. Among them, 42.5 million are refugees. While it's just one example of the adherence decline in adherence to the international rule of law, refugee law has proved to be one of the most challenging and toxic issues globally that's led to a rejection of international law. And that brings me then to Australia and refugee policies. This country is a relatively successful democracy, as I've said. It's punched well above its weight, and I know this in the UN, in supporting international laws in the early days. We were involved in drafting the Charter. Doc Ebbett played a very strong role with the Declaration of Human Rights, and we've played that role creatively and supportively all the way to the creation of the International Criminal Court at the turn of this century. We've been a strong advocate for GATT and the trade, and we have led much of the negotiations for human rights agreements, and those particularly the Disabilities Convention. We've been a global leader in protecting refugees. We've signed the Refugee Convention, and we have had one of the most useful and humane international refugee resettlement policies. But this all ground to a halt at the beginning of this century, 2001, with the Tampa affair, that reversed those policies and led not only to a denial of the principles of the Refugee Convention, the right to claim asylum, the right to education, to non-discrimination, to decent housing, to work, etc. All of those principles disappeared. But we also had an opportunity for executive governments to pass laws which are egregiously in breach of national laws as well as international laws. Australia has used its executive powers to a degree to deny the right to asylum, to detain refugees in isolated detention facilities on Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and Christmas Island, including the detention of children for years without education, causing severe mental harm. Well, these are the realities of even one of the better and successful democracies in the world. So what are the solutions? One, of course, education and civic awareness. Another, the increased role of civil society. And I certainly saw this in my job through so many countries throughout the world, that where human rights policies, but particularly refugee policies, were implemented, it was usually or almost invariably local communities, faith groups, the various professions, teachers, local community groups, and the various international and national organizations. We need to encourage that local development and to strengthen democracy from the bottom up rather than what we've seen, which is essentially the creation of these laws from the top down. And my final point is, and this is where I really land, that is that Australia is in dire need of a federally legislated Human Rights Act. Australia is the only common law country in the world that does not have some form of legislated or constitutionally entrenched charter or Bill of Rights. And that explains why the High Court in the Al-Kateb case could agree that a stateless man could be held in mandatory detention indefinitely when no other nation would accept him. It took the High Court 20 years to find a legal basis on which to overturn that decision just 2 years ago. And in a recent, and I mention only one because there are so many examples, but in a highly questionable effort to undermine the High Court, the Government of Australia recently passed a law termed colloquially as the Anti-Fairness Act, which denies common law rights to natural justice to people being deported to Nauru. It's a denial of basic human rights to due process under any democratic system, and it amounts to mandatory detention in a tiny island, something that I think Australians would deeply understand, a denial of the basic idea of fairness. But I also believe that in this time of polarisation and division within the Australian society, a Human Rights Act can bring people together with common values of dignity, respect, equality and justice, providing processes to deal with divisions and ensuring accountability. In short, we should place the national focus on our harmony around those common values rather than identity. a Human Rights Act at the federal level, which can, of course, be repealed if it doesn't work. It's not like a constitution, but it can improve the lives of everybody living in Australia and provide a level of justice that we are seeing at state level in Victoria, ACT, and Queensland. So in conclusion, democracy and the rule of law are under threat globally and in Australia. We see a fragmentation of political parties and a drift to extreme right and left views, leaving a vacuum in the sensible middle. Our meeting today is a valuable step to finding principled and pragmatic solutions that can reinvigorate our commitment to democracy and to the law, both within Australia and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian, for bringing to the table and putting it at the centre of the table the whole question of human rights, international law, and what Australia could and should be doing. And as you've said, the 21st century, not so good so far. Okay, now I want to just mention quickly, but importantly, a number of supporting organisations that have made this event possible. Pearls and Irritations, and many of you will know about it. Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, the Information Rights Project, the Turkish Heritage Society Australia, PEN Melbourne, the No AUKUS Coalition, Pax Christi Victoria, Burning Platforms Podcast by Per Capita, and Web Trade Marketing Proprietary Limited. We are deeply grateful to them for their assistance in many different ways and look forward to working closely with them in the time ahead. Now to our third speaker, one from a younger generation who has achieved so much in such a short time, Natalie Kyriacou OAM. An environmentalist, author, social entrepreneur, working at the intersection of nature, climate justice, and civic engagement. Founder of My Green World, author of the bestseller Nature's Last Dance last year, board director at the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, UNESCO Green Citizens Pathfinder, and National Ambassador for the Australian Conservation Foundation. Natalie credits her Greek Cypriot heritage with shaping her worldview and approach to storytelling. We look forward to your address.
How do you think we will be written about? Imagine it's 500 years from now. How would these future humans, or humanoids, describe what the world looked like in 2026? How would they explain the rules that guided how we lived in 2026? I'll start. We had access to more information than any civilization in human history, and we used it chiefly to quarrel with strangers on small glowing rectangles owned by hairless billionaires who'd discovered that they could monetize human misery, vanity, and emotional instability. We had robust scientific data. Unlike any generation before us, and we used it to form conspiracy theories, deny climate change, and perfect plastic surgery techniques. We built an economic system that prospered from oil spills, war, cancer, drug addiction, gambling addiction, mental health crisis, and private prisons, but we didn't consider human or environmental health. We also invented social media, a tool capable of connecting humanity across continents and it promptly addicted us, surveilled us, radicalised us, destroyed our attention spans, damaged our children psychologically, and gave teenagers eating disorders. We had institutions to govern the world. Often there would be big events where world leaders would gather to solve problems. These events functioned much like a school group project, which involved grand objectives paired with the unspoken understanding that no one was really actually going to do anything. Every 3 years, millions of people would gather in school halls to perform a sacred ritual. They would vote between a small number of very similar-looking men who would go on to lead the country. Then, having performed this sacred election ritual, voters would spend the following years ignoring politics entirely while binge-watching reality TV and listening to male podcast hosts discuss protein supplements and whether or not women's rights was ruining civilization. We were the only species that actively debated whether or not we should maintain the environmental conditions necessary for our own continued existence. Ensuring the health of things like the atmosphere and forests and oceans and rivers and animals would presumably be an obvious priority for a species that rely entirely on those things to survive, something that we could all agree on. But no, we couldn't agree on that. Environmental debates became so tedious that by the end of it, even the environmentalists were sick of the environment. Children were starving en masse, and though I'm good. Children were starving en masse, and though we had the ability to stop that, we chose not to. Oh my God, that's embarrassing. A very small number of individuals accumulated more wealth than entire nations, and then they used it to purchase yachts, media companies, private space programs, and often just bought the political system itself. Humans are unique. Not in the impressive way, like an octopus that can change colours, but like a person that clips their toenails on the bus. The uniqueness lies in the absurdity. We have split the atom, we've cracked the genetic code, and we've hurtled expensive metal objects into space, often with people inside, just to see if we could. We've built cities that scrape the sky, machines that think, and we've built a global communications network that allows people to yell at each other from any time of the day and any place of the world. But when it comes to the question of whether we should keep our own planet habitable and our own people alive, we remain curiously undecided. We have turned the simple matter of survival into an endless controversy. And to be clear, these things happen because we allow them to. There is nothing inevitable about the way that we run our economies or draft our laws or govern our societies. These systems have no independent existence. They exist because we will them to. They are human constructs. These are the rules of our own making, rules that we just made up and follow with devotion. Unlike the laws of nature, like gravity, for example, which applies equally to everyone, human-made systems like economics, law, and politics are made up and often structured to the advantage of a small and select group of people. And that is why gravity applies to everybody, but tax loopholes do not. And these human constructs, these human systems, they normalise the destruction of nature and communities. Human and environmental suffering persist not because we lack alternatives, but because we allow it to remain profitable, socially tolerated, and politically viable. But the world does not have to work this way. We made it this way, and that means we can make it work differently. Like all human-made systems, they can be rewritten, assuming, of course, that we want to. So we need to remake the world. But frankly, humans can't be trusted to take on this job. We just are simply not qualified. We have proven time and time again that we are not good at taking care of each other and we are not good at taking care of the planet. So perhaps it's time that we stop looking exclusively to ourselves for guidance. With that in mind, here are 5 things that we can learn about fixing the world from things that aren't human. These are lessons from nature. Lesson 1, penguins. During Antarctic winters, emperor penguins form a tight huddle together to keep warm. And every minute or every 30 to 60 seconds, the entire group moves, allowing the penguins on the outer edge of the huddle to move into the warmer, sheltered centre of the huddle. This ensures no individual freezes on the outside of the group. The lesson here is survival depends on sharing hardship so no one is left to bear it alone. In penguin society, for example, there are no penguins that charter a private jet to escape to a remote island while everybody else suffers. Lesson 2, ravens. Ravens track how others behave, and they remember who is reliable and who is not. Individuals that cheat, harm, or behave aggressively can be avoided or excluded in future interactions. The lesson here is, in raven society, persistent cheaters do not get socially promoted, and they certainly don't become president. Lesson 3, honeybees. When honeybees need a new home, hundreds of scout bees fly out to inspect potential sites. On their return to the hive, each scout communicates the location of a potential new home for the hive to consider. And they do this by performing a waggle dance in front of their hive mates. Over the course of several days, the scouts spend hours dancing, each advocating for a possible location. As the days pass, consensus begins to emerge around the best option for a new home. The lesson here is that honeybees understand that healthy democracies depend on transparent information sharing, distributed participation, and rewarding the best available evidence. There is no single billionaire bee that controls the information. Lesson 4, forests. Forests survive because no single tree can monopolise resources indefinitely without weakening the broader system. Though they compete for sunlight and space, trees share water and nutrients through underground networks, and they also use those networks to communicate. Trees even send out distress signals to other trees, so when there's a drought or disease, the other trees will receive these signals. Importantly, when one species becomes too dominant, the ecosystem becomes more fragile and prone to pests and diseases. Trees have natural limits to growth. They can only take so much sunlight, water, and space before growth becomes harder, slower, and less efficient. The lesson here is healthy forests don't allow unlimited dominance by a single tree. No system survives unchecked monopolies, not even forests. When too much power sits in one place, or when one part of a system takes too many resources, the whole system becomes weaker. In the forest, there is no such thing as an oligarchy. Lesson 5, elephants. There is a photo that is going to come up of elephants. This is of 2 elephants that are mourning the death of another elephant. African elephants have a matriarchal society where the oldest, most experienced female usually leads the herd with wisdom, empathy, and protective care rather than dominance. Elephant matriarchs guide the herd using experience. They remember water sources, droughts, and dangers. Elephants care collectively for calves. They care for the injured and they care for the elderly, and they share wisdom across generations. The lesson here is success lies not in dominance, but empathy, wisdom, and protection of others. And the other lesson is that perhaps having women lead societies isn't such a radical idea after all. The last few years have stripped away the illusion. We have seen plainly and without disguise what our systems have become. The mask is off. We see the decay. We see what emerges when power operates without restraint, without accountability, and without conscience. The powers that emerge today, the ones who shield pedophiles or are pedophiles and lock up children and bomb hospitals and raise forests and profit off war, they are symptoms of these systems, systems that we have aided. The world as we know it is fracturing, and in its place, something new is taking shape. And the question is, what will we allow it to become? Too many of us have become complacent. We have allowed freedoms to be chipped away bit by bit. We have seen truth distorted. We have watched as the right to protest is eroded, as wealth, information and power concentrate into fewer and fewer hands. Too many of us have stood by while others suffered, reassuring ourselves with the most dangerous sentence of them all: at least it's not happening to me. Too many of us are living through machines and screens while the real world, the one that actually holds our bodies and forests and rivers and our air, becomes something we pass through rather than belong to. And somewhere in this process, too many of us have lost part of ourselves, our courage, our empathy, our social intelligence, our connection to nature, to community, to reality. And in doing so, we have forgotten something very simple. This world is shared. No species survives alone, and the greatest strength of a species is not singularity and dominance. It is diversity and ability to collaborate. And if I could make one request, it would be this. Remember your role in this world. You are not a spectator, you are a participant. The people with courage, so many of my friends and colleagues and people in this audience, are fighting every day, refusing to accept that this is inevitable, that this is the best that we can do, that this is the world we are handing our children. They are standing on the front lines, taking the brunt of the attacks, and they are wondering, where the hell is everybody? We need to be more like... We need to be more like penguins. We leave no one in the cold. We need to be more like ravens. We don't reward bad behaviour. We need to be more like honeybees. We build collective intelligence. We need to be more like forests. We keep power in check. We need to be more like elephants. We are guided by empathy. The future isn't just shaped through grand sweeping gestures, but in the little moments, the tiny choices that we make every day, the small actions that ripple outwards, in the fights that we refuse to abandon, in the status quo we refuse to accept, in the moments that we show up for one another, the moments that we choose empathy over apathy and kindness over cruelty and courage over silence. The world doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't. We made it this way. We tolerate it. We endorse it. And now we must unmake it. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for some rather sobering observations which hit the mark. Thank you. Well, now I'm going to call on Peter Lewis to share with us some of the answers you've given to a first set of questions. Peter is Director of Essential Media Communications. Where's Peter?
Hey.
There you go.
1, 2. 1, 2. Everyone can hear me. Hi, everyone. It was the American who said democracy is written by those that turn up. One of the reasons I'm delighted to be supporting conversations with Crossroads. It's about building better feedback loops And what we will do with this is collect this all and put it into a report and then send it back to everybody who's been in the room today. So again, if you haven't been in there yet, it's going to be open for 3 or 4 more days. Put your thoughts in there. This is a real life workshop. I do a lot of polling with Guardian Australia. This is a closed group rather than the general public, but it'll be very interesting to see how this sits against the broader public. And we will be putting some of these questions into our next Guardian Essential report. We might go to the next slide because I know we're on time. This is a salience question. How concerned are you about the following? And we're concerned about all of them really. Pick your favourite child. Major decisions are being made behind closed doors. Citizens are powerless and disillusioned. Growing inequality of wealth and income. Politicians putting electoral success ahead of the common good. And we've heard some great speeches bringing those ideas to life over the last hour. One more question before we go to the music. And this is a different technique, which is one that we've been working with over the last couple of years. It's called quadratics. So rather than asking you a binary yes, no, it's about giving you 100 points and you allocating it. Not every question has a yes, no answer, and the real truth sits in the preferences and the priorities. So this is really interesting, isn't it? So on the 100 points that we've given you guys, the biggest concern, and it's, you know, often you'll just get quarter on this, but 38% money and lobbying have corrupted politics. That kind of is a fairly clear and present danger. Media prioritises spectacle over substance. As someone that spent 30 years in the media, I get it. The wrong people have power and authority. Well, that's what democracy's about. And then down, and I won't say the bottom of the list because it's probably the most important element, citizens don't have the opportunities to engage, which says to me that it's not the lack of opportunity, it is then the receptiveness of those other interests to that. So we're not going to go through we'll come back after the music break, but the other set of questions are really more about, so what can you do to change what we see here? So please keep using the QR code, keep working through those questions, and we'll see what solutions we can come up with after the break. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, where is... Thank you very much, Peter. Very interesting answers, and... this rather special musical interlude. Will.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a minute to introduce our musical interlude for this afternoon, consisting of outstanding performance from Tarab Ensemble and the Victorian Trade Union Choir. Tarab Ensemble, thank you. Tarab Ensemble is Australia's leading instrumental classical Arabic music group, but with a twist. Founded in 2019 by Palestinian-Australian artist and intellectual Yusuf Arimawi, with members from the Arab world as well as Australia, Armenia, Japan and Iran. Known for unique fusions with artists from across the globe, including collaborations with the Victorian Trade Union Choir, the band has played to sell-out shows across the country, blending music, poetry, calligraphy and choreography. The Victorian Trade Union Choir, led by Michael Roper, is a 30-member music group which recently celebrated its 35th anniversary. Thank you. A cappella singing group dedicated to promoting social justice and trade unionism with a focus on protest songs, peace anthems, and international music. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you with Tarab Ensemble and the Victorian Trade Union Choir. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Salam, everyone. Shukran. Thank you. On this very same place, 36 years ago, was the very first concert for the Victorian Trade Union Choir in 1990 when Nelson Mandela came to Australia. They sang the South African national anthem. And in the group, Graham was there. Graham. So we are going to play 5 pieces. I will mention them now in order. The first piece is a piece called Bread and Roses by the choir that will be preceded by a Contentment and Light Sufi music intro. The next piece is by Gibran Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese novelist. Give Me the Night and Sing. The third piece is Yamma Mwayl al-Hawa, correct? Right order? Which is a Palestinian song for resistance. And there is one line that roughly translates ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم النذل فيا. I would rather be stabbed by daggers than being ruled by villains. And there is another piece called Halwa Ya Baladi, and the final piece called Lamma Bada from the Andalusi tradition, that I will start it with reading the translation of a poem by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. Hope you enjoy our act.
marching, marching, we battle to for men, for they are in the struggle, and together we will win. Our lives shall not be sweated, from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies, give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing, their ancient cry for bread. So Lord and love and beauty, their trudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall. The rising of the women means the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler, tent and toil where one reposes, but the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
اتخذت الغابة مثلي منزلا دون القصور فتتبعت السواقي وتسلقت الصخور هل اتخذت الغابة مثلي منزلا دون القصور فتتبعت السواقي وتسلقت الصخور هل تحممت بعطر تنشفت بنور هل تحممت بعطر وتنشفت بنور وشربت الفجر خمرا في كؤوس من أثير يما مويل الهوى يما مويلي يما مويل الهوى يما ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم النازل فيا حلوة يا بلدي حلوة يا بلدي واو واو واو.
Thank you. The last piece, لما بدأ. Thank you very much. You can support us by joining our mailing list of this QR code. Thank you very much.
so much to the Tarab Ensemble and the Victorian Trade Union Choir. Inspiring, mesmerizing music. We loved it, and it seems as if the two groups Professor Mark Rose is a Gunditjmara man from Western Victoria, presently Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous at Deakin University, where he has led the development and implementation of the university's Indigenous strategy and guided efforts to embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge across curriculum and training. His leadership across education, policy, community engagement at state, national and international levels has been immense. We welcome Mark Rose.
Good afternoon, everyone, and Natma in my language, welcome. Would you indulge me in studying this proper way by acknowledging Colin's welcome to country before, and to Colin and to all of him today, let us join in all our ancestries and create a tapestry of love and progress. Thank you. So to the Wurundjeri, I bring the fire of my ancestors to this gathering and the compliments of my elders. I am a Gunditjmara man from Western Victoria. My bloodline flows along the Hopkins River into the Framlingham Forest, and my totem is a black cockatoo with a red tail, except for one wild night in Beijing. I was teaching an MBA program over at the Power University in Beijing, and the students were great. They took myself and the teaching team out for a meal, and we toasted each other's health. Then we toasted each other's family's health. We toasted each other's pets' health, and it was getting out of control then. And then they said, "Professor, we have a surprise." So they brought in a baby snake. They snipped the head and bled the blood into a cup and gave it to me to drink. And that, yeah, I know. That was my reaction on the inside. But being a hard-nosed academic, I looked at it very seriously, and in my head I said, "Oh shit, how do I handle this?" But I looked at it and said, I'm really touched by this cultural gesture, and I've shared with you I'm a person of Indigenous heritage, and the snake is my totem, and I can't possibly drink it. And then I said, I can't drink it, but my non-Indigenous colleagues can drink it on my behalf. They're still not talking to me. When I turn up to talk, I often see a look of disappointment because they're expecting an Aboriginal person to come out. And an Aboriginal comedian refers to me as the only black fellow that looks like Colonel Sanders. So, be that as it may, I am the son of a dreaming, and I am a son of a stolen generation. My father was stolen at 6 years of age, spent most of his life in the Northeast, except toward the end of his stay, where he was given to farmers in Gippsland as a slave. So I'm a son of the dreaming, but also a son of a slave. And in starting this talk, I also want to recognise a cousin of mine who's been here to this place also. Lionel Rose was up on the balcony in 1968, the toast of the city, after winning the world title, bantamweight title. So I want to recognise, yeah. I had an interview recently around the new ATEC Commission, Tertiary Education Commission, asked what I knew about equity. Well, I said, I'm a black kid from Broadmeadows. What else do you need to know? So, being born under the Aborigines Protection Act, I was essentially born stateless, and I was 12 years of age before the Act was passed in 1967, and that made me a citizen at that time. So that is something that I've just come back from a Harvard Black Leadership Group, and that's something that really blew them away. But having said that, my life work, as Joe mentioned, has been in education, and I fought to move education from being an oppressor to a liberator. And I often start off these presentations with the word dispossession on the board, and then I get the Qantas eye roll. He's going to bang on about Aboriginal dispossession. And I do get it, but I get up and talk about white dispossession. If you've gone through our great education system in this country and you haven't been exposed to the cultural heritage of the land that you live, love and work on, you've been robbed. And yeah. Then I do a dirty trick. I say, put up your hand if you went to a government school. Half put up their hand. Put up your hand if you went to a private school where you paid fees. The other half put up their hand. Then I say, you should be twice as cheesed off because you paid for that ignorance. If you went to a government school, you would have got it for nothing. And Joe and I went to the same school. So I'm looking at today, what does it represent to me? Unfinished business. Now, I don't know how romantic you are, but every Valentine's Day, a group of us it's like a pilgrimage we take to Canberra, not for romance, but to hear the Closing the Gap report. And every time it undoes therapy I had as a former teacher of the Year 9 excuses why homework hasn't been done. And it is outrageous. And if we're going to look at democracy, let's go to one of the causes of that, and I refer to it as the vagaries of Westminster. Now, in the vagaries of Westminster, it's a simple proposition. One group gets voted in, and another group gets voted out. And the group that gets voted in wants to be completely different to the one that just got voted out. And we're going to see that in Farah tonight, I'm sure, as we go home and watch whatever we watch. And when that happens, it's okay because in the Westminster, it creates a tension, a creative tension of innovation and change. But for blackfellas, it means that we get taken back to ground zero every 3 to 4 years, and that is why the gap is not being shut. So I applaud here in Victoria for having a treaty. But I also applaud here in Victoria organisations like Victorian Aboriginal Education who have, in partnership with the government, gone to a 10-year policy strategy. So closing the gap is not going to be the term of the Parliament. It's going to take much longer, and we need to look outward. Also, the 3 tiers of government is also confronting, given the fact that we are geographically the size of the United States, yet we've got the population of New York, so roughly speaking. And that being the case, the 3 tiers of government, I was reading if you do early on a Saturday, the Buffalo Law Review, and Salman Cohen quoted that in the marketing for for federalism, that it was proposed to all people in the 1800s that the cost of a federal government will be less than the registration of your dog. And as we go to the Treasury and the budget for next year federally, think about how much the dog must cost to register. But the original Constitution was in fact a timestamp. It reflected the demographics of the day, and it reflected the aspiration of the times. And in doing that, we were left out. Aboriginal people were left out, except for one expression. Now, the painting you spoke about before is magnificent, but if you go up to the exhibition building, I think they may have removed it, but there are gargoyles in the image of Aboriginal people on the building in the original. So when we say we weren't present, we were present in a very strange way. The Australian Constitution was very, in my opinion, very pedestrian. contractual and administrative. It read like a business contract. If we put a railway in, West Australia won't become Westralia, they'll become part of the Commonwealth. The opportunity for New Zealand to become part of us, we'll have to discuss cricket at another stage. And it's very administrative. It reflected the then and not now. What we are now, if we're going to reflect identity, there are four faces of Australia. We have a colonial history that we should be proud of, okay? We should recognise and be proud of. I'm not here going to say that doesn't exist. That's one of the faces only. The other face is that geographically we're part of Asia and part of the Pacific. That should be reflected in everything we do. Third, we're the world's most harmonious and broadest multicultural society. And I would argue that we've always been, yeah, great. We have always been a multicultural society prior to contact. And finally, we're the world's oldest continuous culture. And we can't craft... I know. If we can't craft a great democracy out of that, there's something wrong with us. So let's build on that. That be the centre of it. I'm challenged by the time. I'm trained to give 3-hour lectures without drawing breath, so democracy must be cradled in both identity and aspiration, forged in the values that we are as a people, but also as a matured people. We must be a beacon that illuminates unfinished business and draws us to unite in a new light of enlightenment. So thank you very much for listening today. Thank you, as the previous speaker said, for coming out. That is what democracy is. Too deadly, too awesome, safe home, and may the ancestral spirits that got you here safe get you home safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. He did remind me that we went to the same school, which I had forgotten, and he also reminded me about a year 12 class that he attended and to which I spoke, apparently. Anyhow, it's marvellous to have him here on stage and for us to renew the friendship, which I hope will last for a long time. Well, now back to Peter with some more answers to the questions you've been responding to.
Thanks, Joe. How's everyone going? I think one of the democratic challenges is to make public participation less like homework. And when we sing songs and when we've got people that make us laugh, it changes the whole experience, doesn't it? So again, big round of applause for both the performers and our last speaker. So let's go back to the... We've had more than 1,300 people fill out these responses, which is really significant. Can we go back one? Sorry, because we didn't give that one. Statements on democracy. Are we at slide 6? This is always interesting. Go back one more. What might help people you know engage more? So this is actually asking you how you can get more people into rooms like this. Again, this was a quadratic, so those numbers, and so this one is a bit all of the above, but exposure to media that makes them think deeply. The media at the moment is in this arms race for attention where they just want to shock you, they just want to anger you, they just want to divide you. You've got to go looking for other ways of consuming the information so you're not as angry as the other person. So I'll give a pitch to The Guardian, whose model is it's run by a family trust. Its model is to promote the interests of journalism. Very interesting subscriber model. They give it to you for free, but you can choose to pay for it. So please support The Guardian. There's also a number... There's also a number of terrific creators that are finding a home on Substack now. Go and have a look. It's kind of the Thinking Person's social media network, and just to plug, Burning Platforms is on there as well. Processes where people feel welcome and heard. This is what today's part of is as well. I know that afterwards you're going to be encouraged to hang around and talk to each other, meet new people. That's also part of an experience of democracy that isn't transactional. A crisis directly and seriously impacts them. Well, I think we're about to see that, because we're about to be hit by an economic crisis that is the cost of having a relationship with a madman. And being in closer touch with other people, not being on your own. So they're all great design principles for a better democracy, Joe, and I'm sure you'd agree. Let's have a look at a couple of the other slides that have come back. So statements on democracy. Yeah. Statements on democracy, the technology can assist us, education is critical, and the wealth gap as well. And I think that's the unspoken. I think that if people are worried about their material well-being, it is that they are vulnerable to populism, and so the economic equality is also critical to the democratic project. Finally, and we can just let these flow down, we've asked you, open-ended, what is the one issue that might benefit from wider citizen input? I'm sure Joe and his team will really appreciate all these, and again, we'll cluster all those findings so that we can create an agenda for some of the engagement that conversations at the Crossroads can facilitate. On that note, I think we're starting to have the streamings in now, Joe. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Very appreciated. And thank you to all of you who have responded. Well, I now hope that for the next part of our meeting this afternoon, we're going to have two people joining us online. They're not anywhere near Australia, so they have had to get up early in the morning and join us, and I hope they're at the other end and Wendy is there. Well, let me introduce Professor Wendy Brown. Political theorist, public intellectual, Professor Wendy Brown is one of the most influential thinkers of democracy and political power in the contemporary world. Her scholarship has reshaped global debates about the future of democratic governance, economic inequality, and the meaning of citizenship. Her books, translated into more than 20 languages, are widely studied for their depth, their originality, and their capacity to illuminate the forces that are reshaping modern political life. Wendy Brown is joining us from Europe. Please make her welcome.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be among you, to be with a project of democratic rule, and to follow these extraordinary performances and talks. My own contribution today outlines political coordinates for Natalie's brilliant and inspiring account of the world that we have to make. I'm going to argue that the global crisis of liberal democracy Then there's the crisis of mass human migration and devastation. Inequality is too small a word for this. Neoliberalization and financialization have brought home a tiny fraction towards wealth of young and corporation. While a growing quantity of livelihoods faces Christian war, shelter, access to education and healthcare, including in the richest nations on earth.
So much, Wendy. An invitation to a very deep reflection. It's something that the interconnectedness of the situation we have to understand and plan for in the future. Political economy, political ecology, and beyond that. It's something I'm looking forward to hearing again because it has so many insights and so much depth. Thank you. Now, I understand that our last speaker has yet to join us. I'm not sure whether it's a technical problem or something else, but our technical people are looking at it. While we wait to sort that out, let me take you to our next section of the event. I wouldn't mind getting a copy of the questionnaire that's been on every chair, if there is a spare one somewhere. I think mine has absconded. Thank you. Okay. Now, as you all know, this is the beginning of a 7-year project. Don't place too much emphasis on the 7, but it's a long-term project. And we are very much interested and focused on the first. So, the first stage. And the first stage is very much about demonstrating the feasibility of the essence of democracy and also beginning to develop momentum. So there's an awful lot to do. You will find on your seat, apart from this questionnaire, you will find an outline of some of the activities we already have fully planned or halfway planned between now and October. Please have a look at them, make them known to others, and I hope very much you will be able to take part, not in all of them, but at least some. And as usual, they will be, in the planning, take account of the various ideas, suggestions that have already emerged in your response to the earlier set of questions. But we do have some additional questions that we would like to have your response. So if you don't mind, we're going to do 5 or 10 minutes of homework. Probably less than 10. It may be a little more than 5. So the first thing is, please, if you are willing, put your name and email. Of course, we have it through registration, but in order to connect with you about the issues that this questionnaire raises, we would wish to know who is interested in what. So, if you wouldn't mind, you can do it online, or you can through the QR code, or you can do it in writing. If anyone needs a pen or a pencil, they can put their hands up. Name, email, well, phone if you can, you don't have to. Postcode to give us an idea, because we have quite a lot of online people, different parts of Australia and beyond, the postcode to give us some idea roughly where. And then we're not asking for your age, but roughly for what generation you are part of. So whether it is the generation that is pre-World War II or latest generation, people barely in their 20s, please tick the one that describes you. Now, next you see a number of issues. Have a quick look. We would like you to tick 3 at the most. Please don't tick 4 or 5. Do not, because we're only going to take account of the first 3. So if you're 4th and 5th, is, in your view, even more important to you, we're going to miss out on that. 3, 1, 2, or 3. And if there is one other that is not mentioned, please feel free to identify it where there is that space, other, at the bottom. Now, in this task of reclaiming, renewing democracy, we want to focus very much on 3 very large areas. One is education. Very important that the citizen have some understanding of the foundational principles of democracy, which go way beyond the idea of electing someone or voting for someone every 3 years. Barely a footnote in the democratic idea. So much else needs to be attended to, and that requires some learning, skilling, and some perspective on the kind of citizenship that is called for if it is to be true to the democratic idea. And education in all its forms, not just formal education from kinder to university and beyond, but lifelong education. Education through the various channels available to us, not least media and communications. So that's one area. The second one is creating spaces where people can participate here and now, even when the powers that be may not be responsive. It can be within an organization. Our organizations that we know about, whether they be trade unions, environmental groups, peace groups, whatever, groups working on homelessness, mental health, etc., are they run as democratically as they might be? And if you are a member of that organization and you experience little of the depth of the democratic idea, how will you suddenly be able to apply it when you do it at the national or international level? So there's an awful lot to do. And there's an awful lot to do with bringing a whole range of networks, organizations, professional associations, all kinds of groups in touch with each other. We have too much of the silo approach. And yet the fundamentals which impact on every group progressing, working on, focusing on constructive social change is almost always confronted with the same stumbling blocks. To identify them and to be able to act in response to those in a concerted, collaborative, and consultative fashion is terribly important. Creating spaces for democratic participation, and then institutional reform. Reform of institutions, be they political, be they economic, be they social. What are the reforms that are required to create more congenial spaces for democracy to be able to flourish? So, are you interested? Which of those 3 very broad areas attracts your interest most? Of course, you could say, I want to work on all 3, or I want to engage in all 3, but you may have a preference, and we'd like to know what your preference is. Over the page, this is now a direct question. Do you think you can devote some time, some energy, some of your skills, some of your ideas to the project for democratic renewal? Don't hurry to say no, because if you say no, you have to imagine where are the millions going to come that need to say yes, if it's to happen. Are you able to participate in educational and skilling workshops? Are you interested and able? Do you know of people anywhere in your area of contact who may be interested to engage with the project? Yes or no? Thinking laterally. not just immediate family and a few friends, but all the people that you're in touch with professionally, in terms of employment, in terms of study, socializing, entertainment, religious affiliation, whatever. Would you wish to be on the mailing list and keep updated on what's happening, who's doing what, who's thinking about what particular activities or events are being either considered or in the planning? And then, please, so we don't take too much time, look at the next 4 or 5 questions. Are you able to do any of those things, at least to some extent? Yes, if you can, no, if you can't. The last one is perhaps a little bit demanding, but we're very keen to see that kind of thing grow. Are you interested in having a conversation group? Ideal in person, but it could be online. A book club, focusing on all the issues that we've been discussing at this event and other issues related to those. It could be around the homes of people, it could be at the workplace, it could be in the locality or some other community environment. If you're at all interested in the idea of either participating or initiating such a group, please mark that, yes. And now, the difficult one. Not so difficult. The project has no chance of getting off the ground unless it has the necessary funding, which will be substantial. We made an initial estimate that over the next couple of years, we may need up to $500,000. A lot of people then looked at what we were entertaining and laughed. They said, no way $500,000 will do it. So we may need to revise our estimates and aim a little higher. All that, in due course, will involve, of course, support of philanthropic organizations, if we can persuade them that this is a worthwhile investment, and we'll do our very best. But in the meantime, and for as long as we can see into the future, we want to remain independent of political parties and government, and so we want to rely on the contributions of citizens who do not represent a particular political force. So we're appealing to you. These questions don't bind you, by the way, but if you express interest in making a contribution, we'll follow up. You can change your mind, you can decide to give even more, or you can decide to give less, or you can say, I've looked at my bank account and I can't do a single thing, I misled you. But just an intention from where you sit. And lots of people always ask me, what's a reasonable contribution? Of course, there is no answer to that. It all depends on your circumstances. My only answer is, let it hurt at least a little. If it's painless, you can do better. If it's painless. If you hardly think about it, and you don't even regret one little ounce of it, perhaps it means it could have been a little bit higher. We accept one-off contributions, of course, but we're particularly interested in having a predictable, regular flow. But it's really up to you. And there are other things you could help with, approaching others to see if they're sympathetically disposed and might be able to contribute something. You may want to organize a small fundraising activity, something as simple as a small dinner at your place or somewhere else, and people making a contribution towards that. Or you may even have even higher ambitions and be interested in joining the fundraising group. So please tick wherever you think you can make a difference. And if other ideas emerge, by all means add them at the end of the page. So do your very best, And you have either done it, you may have done it electronically, or you will have done it on paper. And if you've done it on paper, please make sure they're collected, and perhaps some people will go around and start collecting the completed sheets. Well, now, do we have Francesca online? No. 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 It's, she nominated the time. Something must have happened. Or she may have tried the wrong link. Has any contact been made with her by email? No. Sorry? Can't hear. Okay. Anyhow, I was going to say that we were delighted that she agreed to speak, because we know how difficult life has been for her. She's been under enormous pressure, traveling and working hard in the face of abuse, threats of one kind or another, sanctions, and much more. Sorry? Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. All right. Well, we're skipping that. We're still hoping against hope she may be able to... I suspect it's a technical glitch. I don't know exactly what, because she emailed me only 12 hours ago saying she was looking forward to it. So something's happened. I don't know what. All right. Let me now, since we have our four speakers with us here, and Wendy is still there, I hope. And there have been some questions which have come through online and by email, and they can be boiled down to two large questions, and I'll put each of them to the panel, the five speakers that we still have with us. Okay. The first question is about the nature of the problem we're encountering at this time, not in one country, but in many, many countries. What do you see as the principal obstacles to democracy? That was a recurring question. What is it? Is it the ascendancy of, these are questions, at the ascendancy of the neoliberalism? Is it the role of advanced technologies? Is it the power of a few to decide on life and death issues like war and peace? Is it that political parties have lost their soul, that they no longer operate, they were at the height of their capacity, when there were hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, joining as members in active deliberation inside the parties, and that appears to have gone? Is that the problem? And last suggestion in one of the questions, is it that we no longer have the capacity for so-called progressive and conservative elements of society to be in dialogue with each other? So these are questions with some ideas shared by those who have put them. Where do you put the fundamental reason for the problems that democracy is encountering in these times? Who would like to offer some comment? Now, come on.
There's very much democracy up there in front of you as we speak. Joe, as you were asking that question, I got into a very Jungian place where Jung talks about we define, many of us define
the comments?
Like to focus on is that I do not think our economy is fit. They don't have numbers that they can list off the top of their head like they would GDP. So I just don't understand who is the economy working for, truly. Yeah.
Well, I think they're very good points. It's very hard to pick one answer to this question, but I think what has happened is that we've lost trust in the system. We don't believe what we're told. We are bewildered by the misinformation and disinformation. We're disgusted by the opportunism of our politicians, the self-serving nature of their behaviour. And we're human beings, and every election and every time we have an opportunity to participate in democracy, we're disappointed that people we believed in did not deliver. And I think one shouldn't be too simplistic. Modern governance is extremely difficult, and the pressures and the different points of view and the different needs are enormous. But I think that we have lost faith in the system, but also we don't think the system is delivering the outcomes that we want to see. The system appears to a significant degree, and I think Wendy Brown is making this as a very, very well-regarded scholar, is that the liberal system, and that I would have in principle have supported in the 60s and 70s when I was a student, but the liberal system has actually delivered an elite that protects itself and is powerful enough to do so. And I think that is a fundamental problem. And I think you'll have guessed by now that my preoccupation is with the importance of the rule of law. I've said that so many times. But if we have an independent judiciary, and we are lucky in Australia that we do have that independent judiciary, that we can balance we can hold people accountable with a legal system that's working efficiently. And I think our legal system has not got the equipment. It's not the lack of quality judges, and it's not the lack of the principle of the legal, the rule of law. It's the lack of equipment. We don't have the legislation or the constitutional provisions in order to provide that basis for the judiciary to work. And I think you made the point, if I may say, that if anybody sat down and read the Australian Constitution, they will be asleep in about 5 minutes. It's a transactional document. It's about governance and the technicalities of a federation. It is not an inspiring document. It's not something you can read and say, that for me describes democracy, that's what I believe in, and that's what I'm going to support. We haven't got that in Australia. I don't know why. I don't historically understand why it was such a miserable document. But it served us well in some respects. I won't go too far on that point. But can I conclude by saying I think we have become anxious. These are uncertain and unpredictable times. We have an American institution and administration that we've placed our trust in for decades, which is now close to insanity. And we have to find a way to move past this. And I think John has made the point, and probably will make again, is we have to review that relationship. It will pass. This administration will change, but I think the landscape has changed irremediably, and we need now to think about what the future is going to be like for an independent and successful democracy that Australia has been, and I think is capable of being again. Thank you.
Well, I agree with all of that, and I was very struck by a few things that were said this afternoon. Australia badly needs a Human Rights Act, Gillian. I like very much Natalie's use of similes, very unorthodox. I think they have great resonance, certainly with our Indigenous peoples. that we need to behave more like penguins and ravens and honeybees and forests and elephants. This is a very unusual way of talking about democracy and very welcome. Wendy Brown, in her appeal for rethinking, reimagining democracy as care for life, and this reparative democracy phrase, I think, deserves further and deep consideration. My brief answer to, what are the priorities, what are the political and policy priorities, is very abstract, in that what seems to me to be going on in so many actually existing democracies is a sense of drift, of confusion, of ressentiment, as the French say. People are really pissed off. And it's essential under these conditions that we return to the basic, we all return to the basic foundational questions of what is the spirit of democracy. It so happens that in the past couple of years, I've been reading Thomas Mann, the great German writer, Nobel laureate, who you may know under circumstances that have some similarities with ours, did a coast-to-coast tour of the United States in 1938. And the core idea that he put to his audiences, some of them were 10,000 people, many of them, most of them at least this size or larger, was that there are times when people have to, as it were, reflect on their own souls, that they have to go back to the foundational question of what is a democracy and what is its spirit. So, yes, institutions like free and fair elections and rule of law are important. Yes, anti-corruption commissions, the importance of civil society, yes. But underpinning that, Thomas Mann suggested, was certain principles that make up the spirit of democracy. The spirit of democracy is like, it's embodied. It's if you've watched a child learn to sit on a chair, you know that there is a learning process that's forgotten. And we should, my idea is that we should try to remember, to recall as deeply as we can what this thing called democracy is. What is it about? It is, of course, quintessentially about equality. An African proverb says that rain falls on every roof. My Irish father would say, a different version, we're all equal in the grave. This idea that democracy is good, not because everybody is the same and born the same. No, it's that nobody is good enough to act like a tyrant or an aristocrat or an oligarch or God on earth. This is the basic foundational principle of the spirit of democracy. And the flip side is that arbitrary power, lawlessness, publicly unaccountable power is not acceptable. And it's not acceptable in the bedroom, and it's not acceptable on the battlefield, and everywhere in between. And part of this spirit of democracy is that there are gestures, a gentle hand extended to a child, a man who speaks softly and respectfully to a woman, our attitudes towards the ecosystems in which we dwell. These are all part of the spirit of democracy. And less obviously, and I'll stop in a second, is an idea that was put by Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville was a French aristocrat who came to the United States at the end of the 1820s. And in a classic called Democracy in America, as it's translated, he put his finger on the point that when the spirit of democracy takes root among people, they do not think of power relationships as given, as natural. My grandmother, my dear grandmother would say, boys are boys, girls are girls. It's always been like that. You know how it is. No, if a democracy takes root in the bodies of people, then they come to see that what is not necessarily what is going to be. And for this reason, the spirit of democracy, I think, is the carrier of hope. Yes, it is about equalization of life chances of all living beings. It refuses arbitrary power, but it denatures that power, and it is therefore the carrier of hope. Hope is not a pessimism. You know, Oscar Wilde, I think, defined pessimism as those who grumble when opportunity knocks at the door. It's not foolish optimism. Hope is the principle, part of a democratic principle, it seems to me, of the spirit of democracy, that what we have now could become the resource to build something different and better for everybody. You know, that shit is the fertilizer of soil, to put it in pub language. And hope is, it seems to me, in very short supply at the present. And I think one of the important, really important features of this initiative is that its purpose is to breathe life back in to this principle of hope and into the spirit of democracy. That's all very abstract, but it does seem to me that reflecting in these times on the matter of spirit of democracy is hugely important.
Wendy, are you with us? Doesn't look like it. Wendy, are you there with us? No. Okay. All right. Okay. We've been blessed with technical glitches. All right. Now, the second question really... sorry, I tend to... bad habit of mine. The second question, or the second set of questions, had to do with where to here. And some of the answers to the preceding question have anticipated, in part, that second question. Nevertheless, what's behind those questions that have come through is what are practical, imaginable steps that could begin to make a difference. So if you're thinking, let's say, Australia, is it reforming institutions that are meant to ensure transparency, accountability, adequate regulation, etc., preventing the exercise of undue influence, and so on? Or is it something to do with reinvigorating the sense of collective capacity, collective empowerment? Or is it thinking a little more humbly and thinking about injecting democracy at the more immediate local level than rather thinking in grand terms at the national or international level, or some other thing? So that's the question. If you were to conceive of practical steps, even though they might themselves take some time, where would you like to see a start or some energy going into them? Who would like to do that? Come on, Ahmad.
It's democracy again up here. I would say, an elder told me once that reconciliation is 1,000 conversations. So the democratic conversation should be in your workplace, in your family, around your friends, and be courageous to have it. I'm going to quote Pauline Hanson, which is very strange. Oh, sorry. I thought they'd get a response. But Senator Hanson said once that political correctness has closed down conversations. So let us open them up. That'd be my suggestion. And don't tell anyone I quoted Pauline Hanson, please.
A couple of things. In my book, I have all of the answers in there. But, I mean, on a basic level, the thing that I'm looking at right now is our tax system, and I don't really understand why we have monopolies and concentrated power, and why we aren't taxing fossil fuel companies, and why we aren't taxing companies like Woolworths, and why I'm paying... I don't know why nurses and teachers are paying more tax than gas companies, for example, so that would be a really easy start. Another one that is slightly maybe obscure is I'd like to see the rights of nature embedded more fully in Australia, which is led by Indigenous people. We have seen Ecuador became the first country in the world to embed the rights of nature into their constitution, and that has come a long way around the world in terms of protecting communities, giving a voice, a legal voice to nature, and giving a stronger voice to Indigenous communities. And it's a really, really wonderful movement. If you haven't heard about it, I'd really encourage checking it out. And then the third one, if it's a little bit more obscure, I think we need to see more young people in these spaces. I think we need to see high school kids. I started a charity more than 10 years ago now, and we had an 8-year-old boy as an advisor to our charity because it was a wildlife education charity, and we knew that if we are educating young people, then they should be involved in the process, and we want to hear from them. So I don't know why we don't have more young people in these spaces, and I hope there'll be more.
Well, I would heartily support that. I think we need that voice. If we're going to talk about intergenerational equity, we need to understand just what we're missing out on when we put such a burden on the next generation as a pretty disgraceful lack of care by my generation. I think we need to see a much more bottom-up approach to democracy rather than seeing it in terms of electing representatives to a parliament in Canberra. We need to see much more engagement at the local level. And certainly my experience, as I said earlier, with the UN is that the real humanitarian outcomes were always delivered by local groups and communities. Although the money might come through the UN, which came through other donors, we need to ensure that those communities are empowered to deliver the sort of outcomes we want to see from democracy. I think that's important. There are other ideas like citizenship juries, that if you have an issue, for example, whether we have nuclear power stations, as one of our political representatives has suggested we need 10 of them, why not invite the local communities where those nuclear power stations are going to be put up to discuss the question about what the options are for the engagement with energy. I think that if we were to do that at a more coherent level, at the local level, we might get some better results that could influence the ways in which our parliaments are actually operating, that they know beforehand what the public attitude is going to be to some of the proposals that are made. I think that we have to really focus on better information, but also we need proper funding of the Australian institutions. And one that I think was mentioned, I was president of the Australian Human Rights Commission. The funding for that body, because of the controversial work that we were engaged in large part, the then government simply reduced the funding or gave the funding to a particular issue and insisted that that was the work that we undertook. Now, the whole point of a Human Rights Commission is that it's independent of government and that it has an independent access to funding through Parliament. But these ideas have simply got lost over the decades in Australia, and the grand vision in the 60s, of course, of the Human Rights Commission has been eaten away at by governments that find human rights commissions to be too controversial, to be too prickly with the details, and fail to support government policies. I think another is that in my day, and I age myself here, but I went to university in the early 60s, and it was quite interesting then that some of the best and the brightest of my law school at Melbourne and other faculties were ones that might aspire to go into politics. They might do a postgraduate degree, but they then became some of the best and brightest of that generation of leaders. I suppose I shouldn't mention names, but I will mention Gareth Evans, who was at law school with me. But people like that became very fine politicians in most respects. And I think the tragedy is that the quality of person who came into politics at that time is no longer available. That in the main, we are seeing people with highly engaged to protect particular identities and interests. And that's not really what Australia is about. And I think we have to find a way of encouraging talented young people who've got a broader view, who can somehow find harmony in putting forward proposals that are in the best interests of Australians as a whole. And I think that's what we've got to work on.
Meanwhile, I'm getting the bell before I even open my mouth, which is not a good sign. I have three things to say. One is demagogues. Practically every democracy, ours is, it seems, an exception for the moment, because the main demagogue is not smart enough. But every democracy, because of the neoliberalism that Wendy spoke about, this growing gap between rich and poor and so on and so forth, has generated a lot of the French word again, ressentiment, anger, envy, pissed off. And it's in this context that demagogues arise. Practically every democracy is now being pushed and pulled hither and thither by demagogues, whether it's Mexico or India. France, possibly, Germany, possibly, Nigel Farage in the UK, and the list goes on. These are dangerous because these demagogues, the evidence is very clear, when they get their hands on governmental power, do everything to destroy an independent judiciary. They do not like an independent bureaucracy, public service. They tame media. They neuter the parliaments and put those democracies on the road to some kind of despotism, as I call it. And if you think this is pie in the sky, it only takes 10 years, as it took in Hungary. Second thing is, this project, I think, could very fruitfully look at the history of democratic innovations since roughly 1945. There are a lot of them that are not known, are potentially usable in this country. They include, all of these, by the way, never existed before in the history of democracy. The idea of works councils, it's a German, Mitbestimmung, jumping around. Bridge doctors is a Korean invention where engineering students go out and are required to inspect the safety of bridges, which are public access lanes, of course, of the bridges of Seoul and other cities. It's these kinds of citizens' assemblies and so on, that coral reef monitoring networks, that are very important for rebuilding and rejuvenating the spirit of democracy. A third thing is George Orwell, finally. George Orwell himself wrote lots about jokes. And one of his famous sentences is that every joke is a little revolution. I mean, Democrats in spirit and substance shouldn't lose. We shouldn't lose our sense of humor. Cultivating a sense of humor to cut down the tall poppies, as my grandparents would have said, is really, really important. So I will tell you one, and then it may flop, but I'll tell you one. Around the time of the Greek Olympics in Athens, two workers are sitting in their office having a coffee, and one says, you know, I feel so proud of Greece. Here we are about to host the Olympics. We were the birthplace of the Olympics. You know, it's just for our people, it's very important, and for our democracy, it's everything. The other one says, did you mention democracy? What are you talking about? And the other worker says, it's like this. You've had a hard day at the office, You are standing at the bus stop and it's pissing down with rain, and the boss pulls up in his BMW and he winds down the window and he says, would you like a ride? Please, get in. And then as you're driving with the boss says, come to my house, you're wet. Please sit by the fire, have a mataxa. The other worker says, did this ever happen to you? No, he said, but it happened to my sister.
Well,
Okay. Unless anyone still wants to have a... No, you're all done? Okay. Well, we do have an explanation regarding Francesca. There was a travel problem, and because she's constantly on the move, and she couldn't get back in time to take part, but is looking forward to another opportunity and invitation, and which she hopefully will be able to accept. So it will happen, and probably it'll happen sometime this year. So we'll arrange something. So apologies on her behalf and for some of the technical glitches we've had in the course of the day, but I think we've had a very, very rich set of contributions, perspectives and insights, and we're all very fortunate to have had the pleasure and the opportunity to listen to them and to be informed and, I think, inspired. So I want to take this opportunity to thank our speakers before... And I'm going to ask Shoba to present a little token of our appreciation. If you would, please.
Yes. Would you like to? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shoba. Thank you. Of course, I want to thank the musicians and the singers for their marvelous contribution. And needless to say, a great thank you to all of you for your participation and contribution in different ways today, before today, and definitely in the days to come. I'd like to also thank all of those who have helped. Dozens of people have contributed to this event. I'm deeply grateful to them for their patience and good humor. I'd like, if I may, to mention two people. One is Eddie Kowalski, partner in crime in heading the project with me, who has made it his passion for many, many years, and he has derived hope and inspiration in the expectation that this project might get somewhere. And last but not least, the woman who has worked tirelessly, who has been in charge of communications and media, social media, the organization of the volunteers, and so much else. Communication with the town hall, sometimes a demanding job. She has done it with extraordinary good grace and ease and great success. Emily Theobald, Emily, we are deeply indebted to you. As I conclude proceedings, may I leave you with two thoughts, both of which I think in different ways speak to the foundations of the democratic journey on which we're all engaged, hopefully all engaged, a journey rather than a destination. The ideal of democracy can never be achieved in its totality, in its perfection. We can simply take steps towards it. And one of those steps I put to you specifically with these times in mind is speaking truth to power. Even when it becomes difficult to speak truth to power. And that brings to mind the destructiveness of silence in the face of the gross abuse of power, the steady erosion of the democratic idea. It brings to mind the story that I'm sure is known to many of you of Martin Niemöller, the Lutheran pastor and theologian, ultra-conservative nationalist, a self-identified anti-Semite who supported Adolf Hitler. Yes, it's true, he was later arrested. But he was arrested primarily because of his opposition to the Nazi state's control of the Protestant churches, of which he was part. For that sin, he was imprisoned in the Sachsenhausen and Dachau concentration camps from 1938 to 1945. And a year or two later, he started on a series of lecturing tours across the United States, Europe, and elsewhere, particularly with Germany in mind. And he communicated what amounted to a confession, but a confession that was meant to speak to everyone who cared to listen. You probably know this one, but I'll go through it just to remind you because of the analogies. First, he said they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak out for me. And we have analogies, as I was hinting a moment ago. They came for the whistleblowers. Many of them have been imprisoned. Some are imprisoned as we speak in Australia. The most notable of them was imprisoned, not here, but in the UK. I think you know who I'm referring to. They came for migrants and asylum seekers. I was not a whistleblower. I was not a migrant or asylum seeker. They came for environmentalists and other protesters. And as we're seeing in the United States, and then they came for political adversaries. The question is, what happens when they come for me, when they come for us? The answer cannot be silence. Truth must have its time. And the second thing that I want to leave with you is that democracy at the best of times is a fragile edifice, built on three interlinked principles, many of which have been spoken of, but they're not standalone principles. Of course, liberty, freedom, not just freedom from coercion, but freedom for the human person to flourish. Equality, not sameness, not earning exactly the same income as anyone else, but equality under the law and in the political process, which is often obstructed by inequality in other areas, including, importantly, in the economic area, which has already been mentioned. And the third one, which the famous French revolutionary slogan went by the word fraternity, which we wouldn't use these days, is really the principle of mutuality. Democracy is not about the coming together of a group of competing wills. It is the general will, the common good. You come not to defend your purely naked self-interest as you see it. You come to defend the common interest. And the common interest, ultimately, is the interest of humanity, which is, again, why human rights, the dignity of the human person and the recognition of those entitlements is so important. But it's not just my right, but your right. It's everyone's right and everyone's need, not just my need. I don't like the look of this building going up. I'm totally opposed to it. It's right next to me. It hides it may be legitimate. But you need to take it in the total context of the community's needs at any given time. So when you take the three together, what it means, as I understand it, democracy means taking care of life in all its forms, not just human life, together. And that reminds me of a poem, and I conclude with this, which was written in 1624. And it reads, the famous poet, John Donne, not that it was written as a poem, but nevertheless it reads as if it were a poem. And I'll briefly read those few lines. No man, wrote John Donne, is an island entire of itself. One will, one set of interests. Every man, is using the analogy, is a piece of the continent, a part of the whole. If a clod be washed away by the sea, speaking about Europe, Europe is the less. As if a promontory were washed away, as well as any manner of your friends and of your own were to be washed away. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in humanity. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. It tolls for you, for me, for everyone, to recognize our common humanity and to act in the spirit of that commonality. So today, when we are reclaiming democracy together, I think basically we are making a pledge to take care of life together. And I hope we can all do it a bit better than we have been. Okay. Now, as you know, what will happen is that for those who have booked for afternoon tea, it will be served in 20, 25 minutes, mingle. But those who haven't booked for afternoon tea, if you wouldn't mind gradually leaving the room so that the people can set up the catering. Gently and gradually. Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can please ask you to put your hands together for the amazing Joe Camilleri. On behalf of Conversation Crossroads, I'd like to thank you, each and every one of you, for being here today. A final round of applause and for our amazing speakers. Those that are staying for afternoon tea, if we can start heading in that direction. Those that are leaving, I'm going to leave you with one last thing. I worked in the corporate life my whole life, and we always talk about ROI, return on investment. This is the time to talk about ROH, our return on humanity. Thank you all. Good night. God bless.